All right. Hello, and welcome to Follow Up Boss Office Hours. Excited to be back. We had a little break, do some scheduling stuff, but we're ready to rock. My name is Lee Adkins. I'll be your host, along with the amazing Katie Isaac. What's up, Katie?
Hello, how are you doing today?
I'm good. It's always good to see you and always fun to do these sessions with you.
I know, likewise. Excited to be on here to chat about ponds today.
Yeah, all things ponds. So ponds at a high level, we'll kind of get into that in a quick second, but ultimately ponds are a newer feature of Follow Boss. They've certainly been around for a while, but I think a lot of us that have been longtime users may still have questions around how do they work or how do configurations, maybe not what are they. So excited to dive into that today. But Katie, at a high level, what is a pond and why would someone want to use a pond?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. A pond at a very high level is just one place for all of your leads to be assigned. So rather than them being assigned to a specific agent, they're assigned to a pond, and you can make it so multiple agents can have access to that pond. So it makes it really easy, especially for those maybe older leads or vendors that you need to share, maybe agents you guys are recruiting. There are a lot of different scenarios and use cases in which you use ponds. Some of our teams use ponds for their brand new leads that come in because that's what works best for them. Some of our teams just use ponds for their old leads. There are so many different use cases, but in the simplest form, it is a location for your leads to live where multiple agents can access them.
Absolutely. And it acts as you said this in essence, but I just want to reiterate it. In essence, it just acts as the agent assignment, right? It is just the assigned agent, and versus it being assigned to one agent where only that agent can see it, or maybe a collaborator or admin can, it opens it up to everybody. So in some sense, it's a shared contact.
Mhm.
But we're going to go through some use cases, also some best practices around if you are using it. And I would say if you're not using Ponds now, using it for new lead routing is definitely a more advanced use.
Yes.
People with 10 ISAs that are going to, whoever sees it first is going to call it. Those are great use cases for a pond. If you're a smaller team and you're like, oh, cool, I'm going to route all my leads to a pond, be very mindful of doing that because it's also an easy way to let leads kind of go into space potentially.
Yeah, it's not something we would recommend for every team. So I always say, if that's your case where you feel like, okay, we've grown to that point and we would like to have that conversation, connect in the Facebook success community about that. I don't think it's something we're going to dive into too much today again because it's not something we recommend for most teams. But ask because we do have teams that operate that way and they can talk you through the amazing ways that they do it.
Yep, absolutely. And I'll drop a link in just a quick second to the Facebook community. If you're not in that, you definitely should be. So why don't you, Kate, do you want to just run us through kind of the basics of ponds, like where to find them, what does it look like when someone's assigned to a pond, all that good stuff.
Yeah. So kicking us off with even just finding, like creating a pond. So you come to the admin section, and this is obviously going to be for team owners and admins, being able to set up and create the ponds. But you can come in here and you can create different ponds. As we see in here, we've got a lot of different ponds. Now, the one thing I really want to point out is this pond lead. So for you guys, if you have a pond lead, what you need to know the significance about that lead agent or pond lead is that if you ever put anybody on an action plan that's in a pond or anything like that, the emails that are going out are going to come from that pond lead. So, with that, that's the significance of that. Really always want to make sure to touch on that. To create a pond, super simple and easy. You title it. So for here, an example of one of my favorite ponds to create is a vendor pond. Thinking about how many times, especially as you have new agents joining your team, they're asking, hey, my client needs a roofing guy. Or I need somebody, to come out and give us a quote on plumbing because this came back on the inspection, painting, flooring, all of those scenarios. Well, you can create a vendor pond for that. And then again, you select your lead your pond team lead. So I'd make it lead, and then we can add whoever we want to in here. Save those changes, and that pond is created. Now, you can always access a pond easily from here, but more so and more often, you're actually just going to be accessing ponds by using this little toggle right here to be able to come in and see the different ponds. You can view all ponds. Again, not going to be as often where you're viewing them all at once because you do want to know who you're reaching out to, and these are categorized. So we might say, okay, let's come see let's find a pond
Yeah,
that
so you can throw some people in one if you want to, because
I
it's
know.
all demo. It's all demo stuff. There we go.
Yep, it's the demo stuff. So there's ones without them. So if we come into the gold mine pond, in here, this is where you're going to see the leads, okay? Pretty simple and straightforward in terms of what it looks like, but as you can see, like Lee said, the agent right here, the pond acts as the assigned agent. So you guys can always assign ones, but this is also where your team members are going to be able to claim a lead from the pond. Um, Lee, anything you want to add in there?
No, I don't. Well, I don't think so. The one thing I guess I wanted to add to the pond lead thing, um, be mindful to a batch email will affix that user's signature. Like it really, because obviously number one, we don't want to send the name of a pond in an email. We don't want to be like, hey, thank you, Goldmine Pond, or hey, thank you, people that never responded to me the first time pond. Like that would never be visible. But batch emails, action plans, like Katie said, and that includes if you move people to a pond and they're on an action plan. So be super mindful of that idea. The other thing, if you don't mind going back to people real quick, if you're an agent level user, or obviously if you have agent level users, they very likely didn't have that drop down at all before. If you have no ponds ever and you have agent level users that just have leads assigned to them, they didn't even have that drop down until you put them into a pond. So be mindful to educate your people. Hey, now you have this new thing you didn't have before. If you're an admin, you're used to it because you've got me, everyone, each user, all those things. The other cool thing that's kind of an aside, but I want to mention it, you can still use your smart lists if they're relevant with ponds. So to Katie's point, if you drop down to the pond, these smart lists are still relevant, but they're only showing you people in that pond.
Mm-hmm.
So something to
Yes.
be mindful of if you create that. Now, it may not make sense because your smart list may be like new lead, hot lead, active client, all those things. So it may not work with that. Another thing, I'll just throw all the good stuff at people up front and then I'll let you back over. Um, the other thing that's interesting about that is ponds can be columns they can be columns, which means therefore they could be a smart list
Mm-hmm.
themselves. So you could just say, again, if you're rolling out ponds and they're new and people don't totally understand how to get to it, you can actually make a smart list with the criteria of pond equals gold mine. And then they'll only see people in that smart list that are in that pond. So there's a lot of different ways to configure it.
Yeah. So, with that, also to touch on something that Lee mentioned that I always say when it comes to ponds, you really do need to do, especially if you have multiple agents that have access to the pond, is making sure we're training well on best practices because the last thing we want is, you know, two agents calling the person the same day, two different agents calling this person the same day. Like Lee said, batch emailing. So that's something where maybe it's like, hey, we are as agents, you're not batch emailing the pond. Maybe that's something where a team leader is in charge of that aspect. Because again, we don't want to overwhelm the leads. We always get this question of like, okay, well, how do we make sure two agents aren't working the same lead at the same time? Well, Follow Up Boss has this great little feature where you're not going to see it right now, but if another user, so if another agent were on this lead, perfect,
Hello
Bridget,
there.
we can see that Bridget is also viewing this lead. If you came into a lead and you saw immediately that Bridget was on there, move on to the next one. Okay, that's just kind of standard best practice. You can always come back to that lead and see, oh, awesome. Like Bridget didn't give them a call. I'm going to give them a call. If you are on here and you see Bridget pop in, the expectation should be that Bridget is going to move on from the next lead. So, really, for you as team leader, setting that expectation with your agents will be so, so helpful. And then creating a standard best practices sheet for ponds of, okay, if somebody called, how often can should you wait to make the next call? And you can always run these filters here on the right side. We can say, okay, I want to see people where their last call, and I actually don't know, I want to go last call made was more than
You want to go way back to get any
2 days
data.
ago. Yeah, you could say 2 days ago, and so it's like, okay, I'm calling somebody who hasn't been called in 2 days. Whatever that is, it makes it really, really easy.
Yep. And as usual, if this is something you're going to use frequently, you can just save it as a smart list. If it's only for this pond, you might name it something like that. So it's really clear. So it's not confusing. Like, why is no one in the smart list when I'm not in a pond?
Yeah,
But yeah, that's really, really great. And one thing I want to mention too that also might be a little bit advanced, but the assignment is the pond, but if you're logged in as you're calling from your follow-up boss number. So I want to be clear, there's no confusion around that. Just because it's assigned, I know a lot of times the assignment is what feels like we're reaching out because they're assigned to us. But rest assured that if you email them, text them, call them, it's all coming from your follow-up boss number and or your same email address. So don't be concerned that because it belongs to a pond that something weird is going to happen when you reach out. It's the same as any other contact and follow boss.
correct. And you would see that. You'd be able to see that, like, oh, okay, it was Linda who reached out last, and then this time it's Lee that reached out. So we do differentiate that and make it really easy for you guys to be able to see that information.
Absolutely. And back to your vendor example, I've got a question. I'll check that in a quick second. But back to the vendor example, having a vendor pond, I can't believe we didn't have one in the demo account. That's one of the main things we recommend to people. There's two things about that. Number one, you probably want to still additionally add a tag that says like vendor plumber, vendor roofer, vendor, just so you can categorize them. Custom fields would be another interesting way to do that, but a little harder to get people to maybe add custom fields or update. So just having a tag that's like vendor painter, vendor roofer is wise. Do you want to add to that, Katie?
Yeah, no, you're hitting it right on the nose, but I'm just going to show you guys kind of what we mean real quick in here. If we were to just take this group of people and we were to,
Yeah,
and
we just
again,
know how to move people to a pond too.
yeah, how to move people to a pond in this process. So you can select here and we would say, okay, we want to assign them to a pond. And these we know are our vendors. We're going to assign them to our vendor pond. It's that simple and that easy. And then we can come in here. And yeah, no, Lee hit it right on the head of being able to add tags so you can quickly go through and see who are my painters, who are my, because you can even, what's even cooler is if you have, okay, I filtered by my painters and these are the painters I want to pull. You could see, okay, I want to actually just quickly export these people and create a list for my team to have a sheet that they can send out to their clients. When I was an agent, that's something we had. We gave in our gift baskets. Our closing gift baskets to sellers is we had a contractor list. And so you could always be updating that contractor list by adding the vendors in here.
That's a great idea. And the other cool thing about this, which again is a little bit of a blessing and a curse, so make sure you kind of have the right plan. Obviously, everybody else in that pond can see that and interactions. It's similar as if they were a collaborator. So they can see if emails are shared, they can see emails, which generally isn't a bad thing. Most people ask about that more so when it comes to mortgage, um, title or attorneys or whatever, or just anyone that may have a slightly more private conversation. We're not going to go too deep into that right now. I just want to mention you will see conversations with other people on your team or emails with them or whatever is in the contact record. Everyone will be able to see that. So it is something just to be slightly mindful of. Um, but again, not a huge thing. A couple of great questions I'd love to tackle. One's jumping a little bit ahead, but it's exciting and I'm ready to go there. Um, Somebody asked about putting agents into a pond, and I would say yes, yes, yes. And I would say number one for recruiting, and number two for co-op agent reasons. If you have a co-op agent in there, you've got all the history of your communications with them. Really good thing. But again, as a recruiting opportunity, you can see those interactions. You can say, wow, look, this co-op agent's really sharp. Let's give them a call when this closes and see if they, might want to come join us or anything to that effect. So highly recommend. We have people that buy the entire state list and put it in their recruiting pond. But I love the idea of having agents in a pond, other agents from other companies in a pond, whether it's recruiting, co-op, keeping notes on them, keeping history of transactions. And they may be separate. If you have a separate recruiting pond and a separate co-op agent pond, people could move between them when they go from co-op to recruiting or whatever makes sense for you.
Yes, absolutely. And to add to or kind of the next question we have back to vendors, is if your agents are emailing with a vendor, those emails, direct one-to-one emails are going to come from whatever agent is sending out the email. It's not going to come from the pond lead. Again, that pond lead is there for those action plans, those batch emails, those kinds of things where it's like big mass stuff. Whereas with one-to-one emailing, that's coming from the agent who is emailing with them.
Yep.
And it's going to show up in their inbox as well, just as standard as if they owned the lead and they were communicating with them and it showed up in their inbox, that communication will show up in their inbox too.
Yeah, and
So,
there's no notifications tied to that. That's just an email. But I do want to, in a little bit, want to get in. I just added to our notes, Katie, to get into the notifications around ponds. But yeah, it's just an email, and you would just have the historical record. But again, a great way to see if, like, hey, all our agents are using this painter. Like everybody's emailing this painter every day to say, hey, I need a quote on this or I need to do that. So again, just good intel. And to Katie's point, I love the idea of pulling it out to be your vendor list. But that way it's always active and updated in your system where you're using it, and then you can export it to be the list. That's sharp.
it was great. It made it easy because then you weren't, past closing getting a ton of calls of especially for those out of state buyers who
Right.
don't have those relationships. It's amazing to be able to like to give that to your clients, and we always use people that like we personally had worked with.
Right.
So that we could be like we had an amazing experience ourselves.
And that's a great keeper. I'm sure it had your guys' logo on it or your name on it or whatever.
Yeah,
Like that's something people are going to keep. That's,
yeah. You could pin it to their fridge, pin it to
right.
the side of your fridge. It was always so simple, but one of the best things that people absolutely loved.
What just occurred to me, what's extra brilliant about it, when people are preparing to sell, they need a vendor list. They need like, oh shoot, we gotta get some work done. That's so smart.
And just like home maintenance, it's all those little things when you are thinking about like as agents, the biggest thing that I think is so easy to lose yourself in when we're talking about our CRM is we're thinking about me, my business. How can my business be better? But like can we shift our thought process to how can I set this up to even make the experience better for my clients? And then that's when you're able to really start to get creative with these things like pawns and being able to say, okay, like, how are we going to make this a positive experience for the potential future client?
Yeah, and that just occurred to me as well. Not to, I can't really help but go off the script a little bit, but another really good way to say have something like an email template for an intro to the vendor. Like,
Yeah.
hey, this is Bob. He's a great painter that we use a lot. Here's his info or whatever those things are. But again, another great opportunity to have this all in your system instead of like, oh, I got to go to Google Drive and find a painter, or whatever.
Yep.
I really dig that. Now, this is a little less sexy use case, but I want to go ahead and hit it.
Yeah.
Another great use of ponds is if you have people leave your team. If they're sphere leads and you have an agreement that like, hey, we're not going to market to these people, but you want to keep them in your system, either to keep transaction data accurate. You don't want to delete them if they have a deal or they had appointments. So you still want that reporting, but you can move them into a pond that nobody else can see. And so no one's going to contact them, but you again have that historical record of, hey, this was so and so sphere. And you can have one pond for that. You don't necessarily have to have like a agent one pond, agent two pond, agent three pond. Just tag it, old sphere lead from Sally, throw it into the old leads pond, not for prospecting, just to keep historical info and, but have no one reach out.
Yeah. Another, again, less sexy use case for this one is when what I will typically recommend teams do is creating a pond just for your team where it has everybody's, again, not their FUB number. This is not where we're putting in necessarily their FUB number, but putting in their personal cell phone number. You can put in their personal cell phone, their name, their email, and sometimes, some of our teams do, they have like favorite things lists for their team members and those kinds of things. So you have all of that in one space, in one place where other team members can go in and access it. Maybe you had a team member really step up and help you out on a transaction, and you want to be able to go in and see their favorite things list and get them something nice. Just an easy space and place to, again, host data on your own team members. But I don't recommend putting in their FUB numbers on that one because we don't want their text tracked. But with that, do recommend putting in their personal number and just their personal contact information.
That's a really great use case to keep that roster. And it's something good to do when maybe you're a little smaller as well. When you get to 100, 150 agents, it's like, it's a project to put them all in there. But if you add that to your onboarding, put them in the pond with their cell phone and maybe like a personal Gmail or whatever is appropriate for you. But I love that idea, Katie, of just being able to put in there like loves, Chick-fil-A or wants to whatever it is. So
On
you
their
can like,
background.
right. We have some people we worked with and set up a pretty cool system very similar to that, just because they wanted to touch everybody in the brokerage, multiple admin, wanted to touch every agent in their brokerage every month. Just make sure somebody from the company says, "Hey, how's it going? Are you good? Are you cool?" Or just checking in on them. So a similar type scenario where it's like we've got our roster, we made sure somebody reached out to them. The other cool thing about that is you can batch email them. Again, if you're using a Gmail, maybe you don't want to do that, but if it's a company email, batch email, hey, team meeting tomorrow. Hey, don't forget we have a training with the mortgage guy on Friday. Just ways to group and organize contacts, really.
Exactly. Exactly. So this kind of brings us, we're going to transition and shift to one of my favorite things to use cohesively with ponds that is easily forgotten is automations.
Yeah.
This is huge for ponds because this is the biggest thing that we can see missed opportunities on in ponds. If you don't have, a lot of teams use ponds for old leads, right? Like that's just point blank period, the most simple, straightforward use case. And quite frankly, unless you have a dedicated ISA or VA that is constantly working in there, your agents are hitting that pond when they can. So it's not on a consistent basis. My favorite automation to set up for especially a old lead pond, and truthfully any pond that you're working, it's simple, but it is going to be a new inquiry, a property saved, or a property viewed. Okay? And then we add that they are in the pond, and whatever pond it is. So we'd say the gold mine pond, they exist in the gold mine pond. Then we can have an action and we can either reassign it out to agents. You could you could reassign it out to agents. You might reassign it to a like high activity pond. You might have a high activity pond that maybe only your top producers are in because they are in there consistently. But making that so that way those leads are actually getting worked and they will fall then if it gets reassigned out, it'll fall into your agent's traditional recently active bond or recently active smart list.
Yep.
And so that way, those leads who are active are not getting missed, which again is just huge. And we really want to make sure we're not missing those leads.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a big one. And there's lots you can do in that automation too. We've actually sometimes when we build this, we'll put a note in it as well
Yeah.
that will go to the agent, when it's reassigned via the automation, making it clear this is an old lead, just so nobody's going to be like, oh, hey, you just inquired on wherever. It's like, no, no, no. Please read the notes first. There's some history here that you are going to want to use um, when you contact them. So you can add a note as well in that automation at the same time as the reassignment, in essence. That'll basically be like, hey, this is a pond lead. Check out their history before you give them a call.
Yes. Love that. Absolutely love that.
That's such a good one. It is a way. I don't want to make it totally set it and forget it. I don't want to be like, hey, just dump people into a pond and wait for that to work. But that's a really powerful tool, especially again, if you're lean or smaller and you're like, hey, we don't have 5 ISAs prospecting in this pond. We need to know when somebody in there does something or takes action or saves a property. You can also, of course, send an email.
Yep.
Hey, thanks for checking out. But I really do think the reassignment, having an agent reach out, is much more powerful than an email that says, hey, you were back on our site. Like, they know they were back on your site. Like,
Yeah. And I mean, again, like we all know at the end of the day, picking up the phone is what converts leads.
yeah,
Action plans, drip campaigns, those things are there to help you get those additional touches. But picking up the phone, or as I've recently been hearing from a lot of the Gen Z agents, texting, but sending those individualized messages, whether it's picking up the phone for a call or sending that text, goes a lot further than an email because I mean, even myself, my email, like my personal email gives me so much anxiety. I probably check it like once a week. I'm like, I live and breathe out of my work email. I'll just, check my personal one once a week. So remember, think about yourself in those scenarios and how you operate. And remember, your clients are probably operating like that too. So picking up the phone is going to go a lot further.
absolutely. I do want to go ahead and tackle Michael's question because I like it. And I found a workaround. I can't remember it. Michael just asked about getting emojis in the smart list because obviously we've got them in here. Katie, do you remember a trick for that? Because recently I've tried to do it a bunch and it doesn't work, but we were able to copy it from something, I feel like, and paste it
Yeah.
in.
So I always do. So one, it's only certain emojis are going to work.
Okay.
Um, is what's funny is what I found. And sometimes you just kind of have to play and toy with that
No
to figure out.
logic to it.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure there is. Our developers definitely probably have logic to it. But with that, I know the star works and I know these numbered ones
Right.
work. But what I always do is so for me, I work off of a MacBook. I just take and I put the emoji in my notes section and then I copy and paste that over. So if I were to come in here and I were to come down and it's after you've already created the list.
Right.
Let's say I wanted to edit upcoming birthdays and add 9 to it. So I'm going to go to I know you guys can't see my other side of my screen, but I'm in my notes app on my Mac and I'm pretty sure this would work if you were using like Word doc or anything like that. I am going to add in the emoji. So I'm gonna find my emoji in here and we'll add the number 9. And I'm just going to copy
See,
that.
it never works live, right?
I know I'm nervous. I'm like, okay, please work. Save, and there it is. And so then when I come down here, we're gonna see the number 9 right there.
I think what I did, if I recall, and I might be recalling wrong, was use it in a Fall Boss email template just to get it in existence and then paste it in. Michael mentioned he was trying to use the fire emoji, which would make perfect sense for hot or right on your website or freaking call these people or whatever. Uh,
Yeah.
I'll check into that a little more and circle back. I want to keep us on ponds, but that was an awesome question, Michael, and I'm gonna check in a little more on. Maybe we'll do a webinar on that one once we figure it all out. We'll do a session on.
We're gonna host an emoji webinar.
I like it actually. We can all just comment with emojis the whole time.
Yes.
That's beautiful, but I'm a big fan of the automation. I'm sure people can think of like 20 other cool things to do with automations and ponds, but that's a great example of a let's throw these old bajillion leads that no one's ever called or that nothing's ever happened into a pond. So we don't have 10 million people in all our smart lists or billion people in the lead stage, and just let either people go in and work it and or that automation work. So big fan of that. Something else I want to mention that's kind of a big deal that I think can be confusing. It's still confusing for me a little bit. Leads still have a stage when they're in a pond. So be mindful of that stage, especially if your stages power automations or action plans or anything like that to run. Um, it's also going to make your lead count in some places look funny if you have all of them sitting in lead stage. Like when you go to your leads and your stages, you're going to have 33,000 people in lead stage, and that's generally not a good best practice. We usually recommend something like a contact stage or something, some random, because the whole point of the pond is you don't want to have a vendor stage and or a vendor lawyer or a vendor whatever. You don't want to have a million ponds, but be mindful of the fact that they still have a stage in the pond. So whether that means you want to put them in a contact pond or just some other, or sorry, stage or some like other stage, but it's wise to keep them out of your, A, B, C, lead, all those sort of things. But they do still have a stage in a pond. So
Yes. We'll have a lot of teams just even create a pawn stage.
right.
Um, where it's like, okay, you got to move them into the pawn stage again because what you guys as team leaders want to make sure you're doing every once in a while is coming in and checking out how are we looking in here? And like Lee said, if you have people that are living in the ponds also living in these stages, it's really going to skew your numbers.
Yeah. So it doesn't
And
reflect in a smart list. So if your smart list is just show me everybody's stage lead, unless you selected the pond, it's not there. But to Katie's point there, it's still in the aggregate totals. And so nobody needs to have 30,000 people hanging out in the lead stage because that's just not a good place to be. And Katie referenced this earlier, but I want to go a little bit deeper. Have a strong policy around claiming from the pond. She mentioned obviously if somebody else is on it, maybe don't call them or don't call them right then. But you really need to have a good policy around claiming pond leads. Is it that they claim some and then call them? Because that's a thing. But then they could also go into space if they call them once, and then you probably want them back in the pond. So my loose recommendation, without knowing your business model or if you're a brokerage or a team or a solo agent, would be to only claim it after you've actually made contact. Like just because you tried to contact them, you're not necessarily claiming it. But if they respond, then you would want to claim it so nobody else is going to reach out.
yeah,
And it's
that's
not a
my recommendation.
complicated policy. It needs to literally be that simple. Like claim them then call, or only claim them after they get back to you.
Yep. I'm with Lee on that one of really again, it's up to you. This is your system. You know how your team works best. But again, the big concern is your agent might call them once, they claim them, then they call them, and then it gets lost in space. We don't want that. That's we try our best to avoid that with everything in terms of your setup. And so really being able to say just, hey, once you have two-way communication, that's your go time to claim them. And then that's just again where the other policies of when other agents can be reaching out, like what's the time period it needs to be since a previous agent has reached out that you can reach out to a lead.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great add to the policy. Like if somebody called them 2 hours ago, like don't call them. But to your point of what you showed earlier, you can make a smart list in that pond that says only show me people who have not been called in the last however long.
Yep.
So, but yeah, it's all the comprehensive of all the things. Katie, let's take a quick look and throw us some questions if you guys have questions. But let's take a quick look at the notifications. Just there's a lot you can do here, and also a new feature. And there's some pond specific things in this.
So down here in the notifications, you have your pond specific ones. You can get notified when new lead is added to the pond and inquiries received from an existing lead in the pond and a lead is released into the pond. So those are really great ones, especially for an inquiry is received from an existing lead in the pond.
Yep, absolutely. And just so you guys know too, if you're not familiar with this, across the top, if you mouse over them, it shows you what each one is. Like the bell is the actual notification bell. The next one is a desktop browser notification if you have those on. I'm not a big fan. The next one's a push notification to mobile where it would put the little one on it and you would do the thing. Text is the next one, and then email is the other one. Additionally, if these are done in bulk, you will not get 4,000 emails if you move 4,000 people to a pond. You will get a single email that says 4,000 people went to the pond, but you will not get an email for every time unless they're done one by one, which actually I probably wouldn't even do that knowing the system. But the inquiry is received is a good one, especially if you're not using that automation. That's going to be one you're going to want to see because again, it's assigned to this pond lead person. And so you don't want it to go into space, especially if your pond lead is like a client care or a less managed account. So especially be mindful of that. You may not want to know when the new lead's added or a lead is released back to a pond, but you probably want to know when an inquiry happens. So be very pay attention to these settings. And by default, they're largely on. So you don't necessarily need to worry about going and tweaking it. You're probably getting a lot of notifications, but this allows you to control that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Um, and anything else on notifications? You have another great question and something in the chat I want to tackle too. But do you have anything else on notifications?
I don't, not in this area. Teams, so for like our pro teams, and platform teams that are listening on here, if you guys do, there is a way you can talk with the customer success team. And again, grow teams you can, but typically if you're on a grow team, you're smaller, might not be even utilizing ponds. But with that, regardless, anybody can reach out to support, or if you have a dedicated CSM, and turn on mandatory pond notifications. So we can set something up on the back end that overrides it. So it's just set up from like alerts regardless. So if you want your team getting alerts, if you guys are heavy pond users, we can set up those and talk you guys through that. So don't ever hesitate to reach out to our support team if that's something that sounds beneficial for you.
Awesome. Beautiful. A really good question too. I can't believe I didn't think to put this in the agenda. Somebody just asked about having a way to put people into the pond automatically after a certain period of time, or if they're unresponsive. I'm huge on this, but I'm gonna let you tackle it, Katie, because I'll get too excited and go for like 20 minutes on this thing. So I'm gonna let you.
No, I love this one. So I always say this is a two-part kind of the question is how can we set up automations for putting leads that are unresponsive to an unresponsive pond? I always recommend like this is kind of a two-step thing, right? First, you want this lead to go through at least the buyer long-term nurture or some kind of long-term nurture action plan before we're moving them in there. But what you can do, and that's a recommendation from me. That might not be something that you're enforcing, and that's okay. But I'm going to show you the example using the buyer long-term nurture action plan. You can do this at the end of any action plan, though. So we can bring down here to the very bottom, and we can say, okay, we are going to add a step that is going to be a stage change. And that stage is automatically going to change to, let's see, unresponsive here, okay? And we would maybe say, okay, so this is happening 2 days after the last email goes out. So we've given the person time to respond, and we'll save this. And then it's as simple as coming over to automations and saying, okay, when anybody stage is changed to unresponsive, and here's where I'm going to pause and show you guys something. I would make sure to go if you are running this automation for a large team, I would go by source, and you might want to exclude any personal lead sources that your agents have added. I know a lot of teams have it where their agents add like sphere leads. you might not want to run this for sphere leads because again, those are leads that the agents brought in themselves. So we would want to say exclude anybody that is in the sphere source. And then we can create a reassignment here. And that's where we would choose if you had the unresponsive pond, old unresponsive leads, and then you would just title it and save it and enable. As simple as that.
Yeah, and part of the reason I love this so much is there's so many ways to do it. You can add a tag at the end of the action plan and have an automation that says the tag makes a stage change, or and that moves them into a pond. Like there's a lot of ways to do it, but loosely speaking, tied to the action, tied to an initially applied action plan or some automatically applied action plan, allows you a ton of control over conditions on that, timing of that. Like we have somebody that actually does it pretty quickly, but they also are heavy touch out front. And so I think it's like day 14. If they don't connect with them, they go, but they have an ISA working hard when they sign up
Yeah.
and that pond. But it's an important differentiation to be like, this is a new lead. And this is we got to work a little harder to dig these people out. So yeah, I can't believe I didn't put that in the notes. Like that's such an important use of ponds. Like if they have not talked to us after X number of days, let's put them in this pond and then let's have an automation of that pond so if they do something,
Yep.
they come back around.
Exactly.
Great question. Thank you for asking that.
Yeah. And don't forget, guys, you can also again start action plans too. So when they get reassigned to the old unresponsive lead pond, maybe it's like Lee said, where it's somebody you guys are heavy on touches and you're like, we only expect agents to own the lead for 30 days. And then after 30 days, we're releasing it to a pond. Well, then maybe that's the case scenario where it's stage change to unresponsive. And then that's when we're triggering the buyer long-term nurture action plan.
Right.
So know that you can do both at once, and make it really easy. So they're still getting dripped on when they're in the pond.
And quick tip for the real nerds in the audience, be sure your action plan has the box unchecked for stop when contacted.
Yeah.
Again, in this model, they potentially haven't been contacted, but that's a really important differentiation. If you're putting them on a plan that you want to kind of run like that for a while, that's probably a better manual stop of an action plan if somebody reaches out.
Yeah.
Because if they respond, stop or unsubscribe, or whatever, then they're not going to get to the next thing that might move them to the even worse leads ponds or whatever that thing is. So
Yes, exactly.
cool. Well, there's a lot of stuff with ponds. Obviously, a lot of different use cases. I think we covered the pond lead thing. Another important thing to mention, just kind of as a housekeeping thing, if you are using ponds for your agents and you expect them to go prospect or do things in there, make sure you also add that to your onboarding checklist to add new agents to a pond. So you don't want to have people on your team who should be in a pond that aren't because they're newer or whatever. So again, that may be something you want to add to your onboarding and say, add to Follow Boss, put on this team, add to this pond, check their phone numbers, the right area code, like all of those sort of things. But again, there is a little bit of maintenance to these potentially. So that's something you might want to consider.
Exactly. Cool. Well,
I think we tackled all the questions and I think you covered all the things, Katie. So
awesome. Yeah, I feel good about what we left them with in terms of ponds. And just remember, ponds are a space where you can get creative. So if there isn't something that we covered that you realize is an amazing use case for pond, share it in the success community. We want to know, we especially as CSMs love hearing from our teams and our agents of what is working for you guys. We do look in there because we get asked all the time for recommendations. So if you have something that we didn't talk about that you know is like, this is a killer use case, share it. Let other people know because we want to be as collaborative as possible at Follow Up Boss.
yeah, absolutely. In fact, this video live streams to that community. So if you have a question, tag me or Katie in that thread. You can tag us anywhere, anytime you like. But and we'll be sure to get an answer or throw you back a quick Loom video or whatever makes sense. And I did just drop a link. So again, if you're not in the Follow Up Boss Success community, you should be. Check the chat. And Katie, thanks again for being amazing. We'll do it again soon.
Okay, thank you.
All right, take care. I'll see you.
Bye.